Hi everyone, welcome to Everyday, your daily stop for virtual reality content. I am D, and this is my review of Half-Life 2 on the Oculus Rift. Now, I've just completed a full Let's Play of Half-Life 2 on the Oculus Rift from beginning to end, 39 episodes. If you want to start watching it, start with part 1, click right here. If you would just like to see the summary, keep watching this video. So, I can't possibly cover a game this large in a single video, but I am going to summarize a few of the areas that I think really impacted how effective it was as a VR experience. So the cutscenes in this game are practically made for VR. In fact, it's amazing that the cutscenes in this game work so well for VR, despite the fact that they were made in an age where VR as we know it didn't exist. For example, the first time that you visit Barney in City 17, and he starts talking to you and he looks you directly in the eye, you really feel like that is a person who is looking you in the eye and talking to you, and it's a very personal and social experience. One of my favorite cutscenes is this one, again from City 17. You walk into an apartment and you see a man comforting a woman, and what I love about this cutscene is that you set the pace of it. You can listen to their dialogue for as long as you like, you can get distracted by Dr. Breen on the TV and go watch him, or you could just walk right by both of them and not even bother looking at them. And that kind of cutscene where it's effectively become part of the environment, where you can choose whether or not to participate in it and the degree to which you want to participate in it, I think it's going to be a really exciting possibility for cutscenes in future VR titles. Now contrast that to a cutscene like this one with Alex and Dr. Kleiner, where the scene is very much scripted and you have very little ability to interrupt the flow of the cutscene. It essentially proceeds at its own pace, regardless of what else you're doing, even if you're not paying any attention whatsoever to the characters. And I think just some small changes to this could make it really more effective as a VR cutscene. If the characters responded to what you were doing when you're not paying attention to them. Despite that, I think that these cutscenes were still effective and they were very important for progressing the story. They really wanted you to be involved with the main plotline, involved with the major characters, and these cutscenes were effective at doing that. And they allowed you to stand in a circle with the major characters and feel like you're in a conversation with some real people, looking from one to the other and listening to their conversation. There are quite a few bugs in these VR ports of Half-Life 2, and that's to a large degree just because these were either experimental or community projects, and so they didn't have a great opportunity to put it through a really strong QA team and really focus on eliminating a lot of the bugs. And a few of the bugs, however, like this one we're looking at now, were actually pretty much game-breaking bugs. They made it almost impossible to complete certain parts of the game. And the way this one worked is if you're in a vehicle that has a gun attached to it, then frequently you would find that your gun's reticle is actually pointed off the screen. For example, it might be pointed to the right of your head, so whenever you fire sideways to the right. And that means you can't aim your weapon because you can't see the reticle, because the reticle is to your right-hand side. And if you move your head, the reticle moves with your head, because the reticle in these vehicles is actually fixed to your head position. So you end up in this situation where you're looking around, you can move your weapon by moving your head, but you can't actually see your reticle, so you can't aim at anything. And since certain enemies, like the Hunter Chopper, can only be brought down with this type of gun, that made it impossible to kill that type of enemy, which was very frustrating. Eventually, I figured out some workarounds for this. If you get into your vehicle a certain specific way, then you can kind of get it to put the gun reticle in front of you instead of to the side of you. And really, this is just something they should fix. Another interesting bug was in the final scene, one of the final cutscenes, when you're being captured by Dr. Breen. You can see that when you look around at others, there's quite a bit of zoom applied to your field of view. It's like you're looking at them through binoculars, and this is not how you would normally be viewing this scene if you were just standing around. And as soon as you get let go, you can start looking around normally again. But I'm not sure why this is zoomed in, and I think that it's important for developers to remember that you have to keep the correct field of view at all times if you want to have a good experience, unless you're doing something weird like looking through binoculars, which would actually change your character's field of view. Finally, not all of the bugs I encountered were in the Valve version of Half-Life 2. At least one was in the Half-Life 2 VR mod, which I'll talk about more in a minute. In this one, I hit a loading screen. That's when it's turning black here. And when it came back, I discovered that the shotgun I had out was no longer out. And in fact, I had no weapon out at all. When I tried to change weapons, I could hear the weapon changing sounds, but when I tried to fire my weapon, nothing happened. And I couldn't see my weapon. I found some enemies, I tried to shoot at them, nothing happened. And even when I went back to the previous screen, before the loading screen, my weapons never came back. So I ended up having to reload to fix that and play back through to that part. So, although the Half-Life 2 VR mod developers are active and much more responsive than the developers of the Valve Half-Life version, which essentially completed the project in summer 2013 and then left it alone. It's still there are still some annoying bugs that they need to fix, and I will definitely let them know about this one. So VR sickness has been a big problem with a lot of players in this game, and here's the first reason: loading screens. Now, I am very resistant to VR sickness in general, but I still hate loading screens with a passion. And the reason is because when you're walking along and you're looking all around you, and you have that freedom of head movement, and suddenly you hit a loading screen, and the screen gets stuck to your face, and no matter where you move your head, your viewpoint doesn't change, that's an incredibly jarring experience. And it's been known to make people sick instantly. And because you can never see a loading point coming before you hit it, you always get surprised by them. Basically, the only way you can deal with loading screens is as soon as one happens, you just keep your head really, really still, don't move at all, and wait until it's over. This problem was minimized to some extent because my machine is able to load things quickly because it has an SSD, and that's another way you can mitigate this problem. But I'm really hoping that in the future they'll find a better solution. So, the Half-Life 2 VR mod tried to solve this problem by, whenever you reach a loading point, instead of just displaying the loading message and freezing the screen, it fades to black, and then loads, and then fades back in. The problem with this is, first of all, it didn't always freeze after it fades to black. It's a little bit buggy. And additionally, I just found the fading to black itself to be disconcerting because, again, loading screens always come as a surprise. And when the screen suddenly fades to black and you don't know what's going on, you can think that you've hit some kind of plot event where everything's turning dark, and you really have to just remember, oh, that's a loading screen. I forgot about that. So it does eliminate some of the possibilities for VR sickness, but it's not the best solution. And there are a couple ways of addressing loading screens that I think are superior. One of them is to take the Metroid Prime approach, which is if an area has not yet loaded, you literally just cannot enter it. The door to that area will not be open. And then it'll open once the area has loaded. Another way of approaching it is to allow you to continue to move your head while the loading is occurring. So you have a separate thread that's doing the loading, and while it's loading, it displays a message that says it's loading, and you can't move, but you can still move your head around and look all around you. And that alleviates a lot of the problems where your head movement is restricted by the current loading screens. Now, loading screens are not the only problem that causes VR sickness in this game. A lot of people are just not comfortable with lots of running around and jumping and spinning and rapid action like you see me doing in this crazy video from one of the last parts. And I don't have a problem with this type of interaction because I'm very resistant to VR sickness because I've played a lot of VR games and I'm just naturally resistant. But if you are not resistant to VR sickness, and you are probably not, then I recommend you play this game more slowly and methodically. that you take your time, you fire at enemies from a distance, you walk, don't run. You don't do a whole lot of jumping, only when you have to. You don't spin around quickly, you turn gradually. And that'll help you avoid a lot of the symptoms of sickness that you get when you play a game like this too aggressively. The Half-Life 2 VR mod is a version of Half-Life 2 created by the community. It uses the Oculus Rift in combination with the Razer Hydra, which is a hand tracking device. And it's really cool because it allows you to move your weapon in space and fire it in any direction you like. Here I'm using it with the Dark Gravity gun, and I really like being able to just grab guys and kind of casually toss them off to the side, over my shoulder, any direction I like without having to look in the direction that I want to use my weapon. So that makes it really natural and opens up a lot of possibilities for new interactions that I think are really exciting. So I really enjoyed that aspect of Half-Life 2 VR mod. Another aspect that I really enjoy is the health energy indicators, which are, instead of being on your heads-up display like they are in the Valve version, are actually displayed on the back of your hand. And your ammo indicator is displayed on your weapon itself, which is in some sense the most natural place for it to be. And by placing them there, you can ensure that you can put them in the middle of your view and you can see them at a comfortable distance, which is actually a big problem with the Valve version, because in the Valve version they're placed very close to your eyes, and they're difficult to focus on. And so although you would think that you would want to keep your health visible at all times so that when you're in a firefight you can see how well you're doing and if you're dying, really it's hard to focus on in VR, and heads-up displays in VR generally don't work so great. So I really actually prefer Half-Life 2 VR's approach of having it on the back of your hand. Whenever you really need to check, you just look at your hand like you're checking your watch, and you can see. Taking a ball with me. So let's talk about resolution. Now, I played this on the Oculus Rift DK1, which had quite limited resolution, and although it's going to improve, it's not going to dramatically improve for quite a long time. So, first of all, in this video series, I've been showing the viewers the game at a higher resolution than I actually see it inside the Rift, and that's just for the viewer's benefit, but this is the resolution I actually see it at. And if we zoom in on some of these soldiers, right in the middle, that are in the distance, you can see that some of them are just tiny blobs of pixels that are barely discernible as soldiers, and that makes them quite difficult to hit. And the problems get even worse. So take a look at this still screenshot of Half-Life 2, in which we've got our gun pointed at a wall, at a dark wall, and you can see our reticle. Now the reticle is pretty small and pretty low resolution. Now in the Rift, we would, unless we were moving our eyes to the corners or the sides, we would mainly be seeing the central region of this image, not the sides of it. And we would have lens distortion stretching out the outer portion of it. So what we would end up seeing would look a little bit more like this. Now the other big difference is you're viewing this image on your high-resolution monitor, which means you're not able to see the screen door effects and other effects that plague the low-resolution Oculus Rift Developer Kit 1 screen. So I'm going to show you what that looks like actually. First, I'm going to show you a photograph that I took of just the central portion of that image that we were looking at. And you can begin to see this is roughly what it looks like when I'm looking at the actual screen. This is not everything I can see, but this is what the central portion of my vision looks like. And you can see that there's this black grid superimposed over the bright orange reticle. And if you're wondering where that grid comes from, we can actually take a closer look at the screen. Now we're zoomed in super high. I would normally not be able to see this much detail. So I'm zoomed in really high here just to show you the structure of the screen. So between each row of pixels, you can clearly see there's a small black line. And that's what causes us to see black lines between the rows of pixels, the horizontal black lines. That's where the electronics that drive the pixels are housed. In addition, you can see that because the reticle is orange, it doesn't have very much blue in it. That means almost all of the blue subpixels are very dark in this image. As a result, the blue subpixels, because of the particular pixel arrangement, form vertical dark lines, and that's where the vertical lines in the grid are coming from. And depending on exactly what kind of image you're looking at, if you were looking at white, the blue pixels would be lit up brightly, but you would still be able to see these tiny subpixels of red, green, and blue. It would not always be clearly visible as a white color. Now, DevKit 2 is almost certainly going to have a 1080p screen, but keep in mind 1920-1080 is actually not dramatically higher in resolution than 1280-800, particularly in the vertical dimension. So we have a long way to go before we can completely eliminate these screen door and visible subpixel effects. An issue with Half-Life 2 in particular is that it has these small bubbles in the middle of the screen, but the rest of the screen is filled with black and other data that we don't see inside the Rift. And the result is that when we look at a scene like this inside the Rift, after it passes through the lenses, the result is a rectangle that's surrounded by black bars on all sides. Now, I'm not saying that it's like a media viewer like the Sony HMZ, or like viewing a TV in a dark room. It's not like that. What it's more like is, say you have a 24-inch monitor and you're viewing it from 1 foot away. So that monitor is going to fill most of your vision, but in your peripheral vision, you're definitely still going to be able to see the black region around it. And if you move your eyes to look at that outer region, you're going to be able to very clearly see the black bars. So they are evident, and you can see them on the screen if you look for them. I usually don't notice them too much while I'm playing, but it's a definite particular problem with this game. Now, if we compare this to, say, Tuscany, which is the technical demo that comes with the Oculus SDK, you can see that the two images in Tuscany are much taller and a little bit wider. That means they have a lot more vertical field of view and a little more horizontal field of view. Now, with this image, if I put my eyes right up against the lenses in the Rift, I will be able to still see a little bit of black around it, but it's a lot less of a problem. If we move to a demo like this, Rift Coaster, where they've actually extended it all the way to the left and right edges of the screen, then looking at this in the Rift, no matter how close my eyes get to the lenses, I just cannot perceive any of the black that is remaining on the screen. It is outside my field of view. And that's the ideal. But there is a trade-off. There's a trade-off between field of view and frame rate, because as you add more field of view, you have to render more and more pixels in order to get every extra degree of field of view. You have to just render more and more pixels. And I feel like that was probably why Half-Life 2 decided to use such small images, because they wanted to keep the frame rate up. But I feel like there are people like me whose machines would be able to keep up with rendering Half-Life 2, even complex scenes, with a high field of view. And I think that's an option that should be left to the individual player and not dictated by the game. Final verdict. Simply put, I think that Half-Life 2 on the Oculus Rift is the best full VR game that has been created so far. Now, there are a lot of small VR demos for the Oculus Rift that have some really cool concepts that have been designed from the ground up for VR and really take advantage of that. But there are very few full games that can really hold a candle to a AAA title like Half-Life 2 that was designed for many hours of gameplay, that has a sophisticated plot, that has a multitude of weapons, each with their own characteristics, that has many diverse enemies, that has these detailed and rich environments that you can spend hours exploring. I feel like I could just go back to any point in this game and walk around in the Rift in God mode or no target mode and just look at all kinds of things in the game and really explore all the details of it. And so I feel like the things that made the original Half-Life 2 great And in addition, the fact that the original Half-Life 2 was kind of unintentionally well designed for VR and how it chose to do its cutscenes and how it chose to do a number of other things really make it an excellent VR game, and one that I would recommend that anyone play if they have the stomach for it, keeping in mind that it is still one of the worst games for VR sickness that exist on the platform today. In short, get an Oculus Rift, play Half-Life 2, move slowly, be careful, don't get sick. Thanks everybody for watching, and everybody have a great every day.